up outside the door.
That's right.
Clamoring. Well, got one.
One clamor.
Doug Kleiman. You can make Doug a participant, a panelist. All right, we'll give it another 2 minutes. Of the committee, we're missing Natasha, Doug McGowan, Susan Schwartz, Elizabeth Caputo. Hi, Doug.
Who's Doug?
Hi, Clary. Hi, Ken.
Still in Verity Park.
Yeah, it's
It's still summer there.
I know you've got a neat.
Yeah, I love those green trees.
Yeah, I'm in denial about the season change. I won't accept it. Mark, you got a sweater on. Are you cold in your apartment?
No, I was earlier, and it's a typical New York apartment that it's either boiling or freezing. So
I know what you mean.
We know people to call at, in the city.
it's not that kind of radiator. Or as the old joke goes, the thermostat in my apartment is the double hung 1/1 window that is right next to the radiator.
Right.
Well, give it 1 more minute. We have 2 attendees. We have Julian Delaporta from Helen Rosenthal's office and Lynette Ioko. I don't know who Lynette is. She's not I think she's not an elected rep, is she?
No, not that I know of.
Glad to have her.
There's the third intruder.
Welcome. Not an intruder. We're welcoming everybody.
Absolutely.
I figure I spam you guys enough. I should join one of your meetings.
Happy to have you, Rich.
I'm going to sign in.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Anybody who is a member of the committee or the board should sign in, so we'll have a record of your attendance. Do it in the chat. Oh, Lynette, I am observing and need to ask a question. Okay, we'll get to that. Let's all sign in.
And apparently it's Cindy traveling incognito as Julian. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Cindy. We miss you.
Let me see if I can unmute Lynette. I think Lynette's, she says she has a question. I might as well just listen to her question, right, Mark?
Sure.
How do I, let me see. How do I?
I'll do it. Oh, I'm sorry. I should give you that power. Give me 1 second. I'll allow Lynette, go ahead.
Lynette?
Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, you said you have a question?
I have absolutely no idea if this is the right place to ask this question or to pose this, because I just found this committee and I just wanted to know if anyone can do anything about the amount of helicopters that are flying over the park. That is what it's making me absolutely insane. I go out there, I want to enjoy my day, and it's like non-stop helicopters all day.
Stop.
That's all I wanted to say. And if
we're going to answer your question. We're going to answer your question, Lynette.
Okay.
We are interested in that. Community Board 7 passed a resolution early this year supporting legislation sponsored by Congressman Nadler to address the helicopter traffic. And if you're looking at your screen, I don't know if you see the same screen I see, but Ken Coughlin, one of our members on my screen of our committee, who's up at the top right of our my screen anyway, and he's a member of our committee. He's our going to be our helicopter guru for our helicopter expert for our committee.
Mm-hmm.
So Lynette, if you put your email address in the chat,
okay.
Ken, are you able to then sort of have an offline discussion with Lynette?
Yeah, and I would just, have you signed the petition yet?
I have signed everything. I've written to everyone. I'm just feeling like nobody is really like, I feel like I'm alone. Like I'm the only person that notices, and I'm just.
No, you're not at all.
Okay.
There's a huge movement about this. If I could cut to the chase a little bit, one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of movement is that air travel, even helicopters flying at 5,000 feet, are the province of the federal FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, not the city, not the state. And there are probably pretty good reasons why you want air travel to be a federal, not a local issue. But it is frustrating in these kinds of circumstances when the will of everyone on the Upper West Side is that Manhattan not be the host to these joyrides and photo essays and so forth. But getting the federal agency to regulate in this way is worse than pulling teeth. So
yeah. Another aspect of it, Lynette, is while the tourist helicopter companies were based in New York City, there were ways that New York City could do some regulation of them. But they figured that out, and they moved their headquarters to Westchester or New Jersey. So basically New York City seems to have no way to regulate them, and we just have to turn to the feds, and that's not going anywhere. But anyway, if you put your email in the chat, you can communicate with
So
Ken.
am I in the right place though to present this question to? Because I've written the governor, I've written the mayor, I've written the governor of New Jersey. I know they're from New Jersey, and I live right next to the park. So it's like, if I have my window open on a nice day, I can't talk to my husband sometimes. Because it's
On Community Board 7, you've come to the right place.
Okay.
But I think we've already told you how powerless we are, although Ken is following the issue.
The Transportation Committee is also taking up this issue and gave an update on it at the last meeting. So maybe you should check in with Transportation next month, and you can definitely raise your question there and get a current update.
Ken, who Clary just explained, is also on the Transportation Committee, as am I, and it is definitely your issue has been expressed quite a bit. So you are not alone, Lynette.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know. And I will leave you guys to have your meeting.
We'd be welcome to join us for the evening. I hope you'll stay.
Lynette,
yes.
Lynette, I posted in chat a organization that we're not affiliated with, but that has come to us, Stop the Chop, that's working on the issue.
Okay. All right.
That's the petition.
Contact me. I'm willing to help. I'm willing to do anything that anybody needs me to do, because I live here and it's driving me crazy.
Well, you need to contact Stop the Chop.
Okay.
They need help.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
A lot of our elected officials are sympathetic. Hopefully our new federal elected official will be sympathetic.
Okay.
Let's
thank you
start
so
our
much.
meeting.
You guys continue your meeting. Thank you.
Sure. Let's start it a little more formally. So my name is Clary Newelt, and I'm the chair of the Parks and Environment Committee of Community Board 7. This is our monthly meeting for November of this year. We have somebody connecting to, good. Our first presenter is just connected. So anybody who's on the committee or on the board, please make sure you sign the chat so we have that for the attendance. And Barbara, also, for the minutes to make sure you have who's here listed in the minutes and who's not here. I think we have all committee members now, other than Elizabeth Caputo, whom I've not seen, but we have all the other committee members and non-committee board members. We have Doug Kleinman, Rich Robbins, and Mark Diller. I think that's it for now. So we are joined by two staff members from three actually, from Parks Department tonight. Matt Genrich is with us, as he typically is, who is the manager for all the parks in our district and the neighboring district other than Riverside and Central Park. So welcome, Matt. I don't see, you're just on audio right now. And Margaret Bracken, who's the landscape architect of Riverside Park, is going to be making a presentation on our second item. But let's start with the first one. I see Matt Donham there in his bedroom with the headphones, but he's our first presenter. Thank you to Barbara Adler, who's now joined our committee, for suggesting and then arranging this first presentation, which is on bioswales and rain gardens. And maybe if there's a difference, Matt's going to tell us about that as part of his presentation. He's the DPR. What's the title, Matt? Are you unmuted? We need to unmute him. How do we do that? Hold on, Matt. We need to unmute you and make him a panelist.
He is a panelist.
You're a panelist now, Matt. And are you muted? You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I unmuted the wrong person. Sorry.
Oh.
But Matt Donham, I think you're all set.
Matt Donham.
Go ahead.
Matt, are you with us now? I think he's still mute.
Nope, he's not muted. I show him as unmuted.
Yeah, there he is, but I can't hear him.
No.
If he's talking.
He's saying 1
Hang
minute.
on.
I think he's fixing
Hang on.
something.
Oh, I'm clicking on unmute. Or is that counterproductive?
That's counterproductive.
Sorry.
Let him sort through.
Okay.
He's fixing something with his microphone. Oh, there, he's connecting to audio. I see it.
Okay, now I ask you to unmute. Now try to unmute now, Matt.
Okay, can you hear me?
We
Excellent.
can. Okay, so Matt is going to give us a presentation on bioswales and rain gardens. And Matt, just if you'd start out by describing who you are with the Parks Department, and you provided slides that I did distribute to the members of the committee, but the other
And
board
I have them
members,
ready to
members
pull
of
up
the
whenever
public
you're
haven't
ready.
seen them
Just
yet.
tell me when you're ready and I'll pull them up.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to run the slides? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And by the way, Barbara
good
Adler is
evening.
taking the minutes.
My name is,
Go ahead.
okay. So my name is Matt Donham, and I am the Director of Capital Design and Construction within Parks' Natural Resources Group. And so there's green infrastructure that occurs across all of our capital projects in various ways, but my group works very closely with the Department of Environmental Protection to implement a citywide. We manage that really closely, so we thought it'd be good to kind of frame our discussion tonight a bit in what we're doing collaboratively between the agencies and with some other agencies in the city. And then we can talk a little bit about the question that came to us, the distinction between rain gardens and bioswales. I'm getting a message that my internet is unstable. Are people hearing me?
Yes.
A little bumpy, but yes.
Okay. All right. So with that, great. So do I have control, or will you be switching the slides?
I have control. I can give you control. You can share your screen if you want, but if your internet is unstable, it might be better to do it from mine.
Okay, great. That sounds perfect. Okay, so you can go ahead to the next slide. And can you get this to be on full screen, view full screen, just to make it a little bigger for people? Okay, so for those who aren't aware, the 5 boroughs, the Green Infrastructure Plan, which has a goal of creating a major reduction in the amount of stormwater that gets combined with sewage and overwhelms our sewage system and winds up overflowing into our waterways. And so the goal is pretty ambitious with a deadline of 2030. And it sort of lands on DEP to meet this goal, but we're working with partner agencies. We're one of the major partner agencies when it comes to parkland to try to help them meet this goal. This map sort of breaks it down into, we're overlaying parklands with what are called priority CSO areas. So those are combined sewer overflow areas. So there are priority areas and future priority areas. And so we're trying to, or DEP, I should say, is trying to work through, starting with the highest priorities first, the areas where we get the most overflows into our waterways. And so that's sort of the root of a lot of the work in my team is steering and supporting DEP in this process, and of course funding funnels through DEP, which allows us to make improvements in parks along the way. Next slide. Am I delayed?
Matt,
So as I mentioned, there are a number of different. Yes.
I'm sorry. If you're having bandwidth problems on your end, and we're looking at the slides anyway, if you turn off your camera, that might help your bandwidth with the audio.
Great, I'll do that.
That applies to everybody, I think, on the committee, if we all turn it off.
We should all go stop video. Is that going to help? We'll try.
That usually helps.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. So I mentioned that this is a collaborative effort with our partner agencies. And it sort of depends on the project and how things overlap, who we're working with. But next slide. So just to give you a little bit of history, Parks has been really involved in, was sort of at the leading edge of developing the technology of green infrastructure. So way back in the 80s, Parks started a program called Green Streets, where as I understand it, this is long before my time, but this was a collaboration with Department of Transportation, where unused areas of the roadway were converted to what were termed green streets and planted. And I'm sure many of you have seen these around your neighborhood. They're all over the city, and they've many have been developed. And it was actually out of those green streets, that idea that we should take, paved area that we're not using and turn it green, that the idea of starting to bring stormwater into those spaces, it sort of grew out of that. So, the agency has, on the top of this slide, you're seeing the agency is developing the internal infrastructure to design and build these projects. And the bottom of the slide is a kind of timeline. So there was a long period of time of building green streets. And then in 2008, the first stormwater green street was tested. And that was the first place where, rather than just planting it, we sort of dug it out a bit to create a bit of a basin and allowed the water from the street to come into the planted area. And then very shortly thereafter, DEP started funding this work, started seeing the benefit. And so that's when the funds became available, we then had the capacity within Parks to create a unit where a group of people who would lead this charge. And then in 2016, DEP really, there had been the development of the technology, if you will, and then in 2016, DEP, you don't see this as much in Manhattan because it's very difficult to build right-of-way swales, as they're sometimes called, right-of-way bioswales. It's difficult to build them in Manhattan for a whole host of reasons, but they are being built all over Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn at a huge scale. And at some point, DEP, when they kind of, all the testing had been done and it was sort of, the concept had been proven, they made a decision to take that whole effort in-house. And so they're building, they have an arrangement with DOT. Parks is not involved anymore. They have their own maintenance strategy, and they're building these things at an enormous scale. The next year, what we started looking at is partnering with DEP on green infrastructure within parks. And so this is where we're actually, rather than being out in the street, we're within parkland, and we are developing, it's a similar idea. We're trying to take water that's coming off of paved areas and get it into the ground rather than putting it into the combined sewer system, but we're doing it within parks. I was out today in Queens looking at a whole bunch of playgrounds, looking at opportunities where we can build projects in the future, and we found a bunch of great opportunities. Just at the beginning of this year, we combined the green infrastructure unit with with our forest restoration capital design group and our wetlands restoration capital design group. And we have this new team that I'm leading called the Natural Resources Capital Design and Construction Team. It's a big mouthful, but what we're finding is that when we can put our skills together around how we restore the forests and wetlands and of the park system and put that together with the green infrastructure effort, we can get parallel benefits. And that's kind of where we are today, what we're working on. Okay, so long history to ground this in where we are today. Next slide. So here's Stormwater Green Street, one of these earlier designs, and you can see that you know, where there had been a wider sidewalk and a parking lane, the curb was built out into the street, and the water on the right side there, water's running down the curb and enters into this planted area and soaks into the ground. And then at the other end that you can't see, it overflows back into the street. So in a major storm that it doesn't have the capacity to hold, it just flows back into the sewer system. Okay, next slide. And here is the right-of-way bioswales. This is what you'll see all over Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. And it's like a modular unit that almost that is getting installed anywhere that makes sense. And what's happening here, right out of the image on the left, would be the catch basin where the stormwater goes into the system. And what we're doing is cutting an opening, letting the water into this space where it can soak into the ground. And again, just like the other one, if it overflows its capacity, it'll come out the outlet there on the left and go into the sewer system. So the idea is to divert the water, soak as much of it into the ground as we can, and then you know, have the sewer system there as backup. Next slide. So, you know, Parks has our goals in working with DEP, and so you know, we're supporting their mandate to reduce the overflows and improve water quality. We're also looking for opportunities where we can construct green infrastructure that it incorporates vegetative systems with ecological co-benefits. So essentially, we want to bring native plants into these spaces so that we can support a rich ecology, so that when DEP gives us the money to build these things, we're getting more than just the benefit for stormwater. We're getting more for the ecology of our city. Excuse me. We want to improve the ecological health of our natural areas and waterways. So if we can combine our efforts to improve the health of the system, that is our goal. We have a group, the stewardship group, that is really involved in bringing the community into the process of doing restoration work. And we're starting to look at how we can apply this to green infrastructure projects. And then we're also conducting research on a number of these sites where we're observing and tracking how the systems are doing. And then we also see our role as supporting designers and maintenance folks across the agency in keeping up with best practices, because the technology is always changing or improving, I should say. Next slide. So Margaret and I were talking about, you know, how to approach the question you asked, and we thought it would be helpful to look at a few recent. This one's very current. This has just been planted. It's still in construction. So let me just initially address the question as it came to us, which was, you know, what is the distinction between a rain garden and a bioswale? And, you know, I learned in school that a rain garden was a place where water, that received water and let it into the ground. And I learned that a bioswale conveyed water, it moved water to a location and cleaned it along the way. So that's how I learned it. But as I've come to experience it out in the world, I've learned that that is not such a bright line between the two things, because they both do both, essentially. You've always got a little bit of conveyance going on within a rain garden, and you also have, within a bioswale that's moving water, you're also infiltrating, and there's water coming into the ground. And so it's not very clear, and actually we find that the terms get used interchangeably. So to illustrate that, we have a number of projects that we can talk through, and then we can answer questions. So this is Spring Creek in Queens. And you can see sort of in the middle of the slide, the chain link fence. We're at the edge of a roadway where people park perpendicular to the edge of what is a large natural area. Spring Creek has wetlands and uplands, and ultimately flows out, excuse me, flows out under the Belt Parkway. Did somebody jump in?
No, you're good.
Okay. So what we're doing is right at the edge of this large natural area, we're receiving water from the street that would otherwise, in this case, it would have been going right into the creek. But instead of letting it into that natural system directly, we are capturing it into these rain gardens. And they work much like the other two images I showed you. The water flows in, has the opportunity in this depressed basin area to fill up and soak in. And then if you get a really big event, rain event, it can flow back out and into the system. And I actually was out there checking on it during that big storm we had two and a half weeks ago, where we got more than 2 inches of rain, and it just barely stayed within the rain garden and didn't flow back out. So we were pleased that it was able to hold that much water. If you go to the next slide, I have construction details where we can see what's going on underground. And so this is just a shallow basin, and it's got 2 feet of planting medium, and then it has 2 feet of broken stone underneath that. It has a pipe in there to increase its volume. Essentially, if you put a pipe in, you get a little bit more volume of water than you get in the gaps between the broken stone. But so the water just flows in here and soaks down through the soil. The plants in the soil capture some of the heavy metals that are coming off of the roadway. And then it makes its way down into the gravel zone, and it can hold a lot of water. It held this 2-inch storm, and then it'll slowly soak down into the ground. Do people have questions looking at these drawings?
Why don't we try to save questions for the end?
Okay, sounds good.
But if somebody absolutely needs to ask a question, I think we have the committee members and board members are not mute. So if they absolutely need to ask something, they can without being called on. I believe that all the non-board members who are the community members who are the attendees are muted at this point.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Great. So if you go to the next slide. So this is in Brighton Beach, and this is a stormwater green street. So this is sort of a legacy project that's finally being built that is right out on the sidewalk. And And what you're seeing on the left is that same storm I was talking about. And we have these pipes that you see here, these white PVC pipes. We have a monitoring system here. And so we're testing both the quantity of water that comes in and flows out of the system and the rate at which it's doing that. And then we're also testing the water quality, looking at what's in the water as it goes in and what's in the water as it comes out, and trying to get a sense for how well it's working. This is in partnership with a professor at Drexel University who does research on green infrastructure. And so this was out, the first storm, even on the left, before we had it planted, just trying to calibrate the system. And then a week later, the plants have just gone in. It's looking a little rough, as landscapes do when they're just planted. But we expect it to grow in nicely in the spring. And if you go to the next slide, so here you can see, similar to the other set of details, here we only have a foot of soil because we have smaller plants growing here. And then we've got a couple of feet of broken stone down below. And it's a very similar mechanism of flowing in, and if it overflows, it flows back out. Here we don't even have a pipe to increase volume. One of the factors that you think about is the infiltration rate of the existing soil. So here in Brighton Beach, we're dealing with a very sandy soil. So the water moves down through this system and into the ground very, very quickly. So we didn't need to increase capacity at all. And this one also handled the 2-inch storm very well. We didn't have any outflow. So it's adequately sized. Okay, next slide. Here's just that same place cutting through it in the other direction. Got a little bit of detail. That stretch in the middle is a gap that is allowing people to get out of their cars and get to the sidewalk. There's a limit to how long these things can be. I'm not sure there's much else to see in this detail. Next slide. So this is a parking lot on Randall's Island at, Parks has a large facility out on Randall's Island called Five Borough, where some centralized services exist and are administered. And so this is primarily an employee parking lot that was retrofit with permeable pavement that you're seeing in the parking space. So it's an asphalt parking lot, and then it has this, on the low end of the parking lot, it has permeable pavement. And then the water that doesn't go down through those permeable pavers can roll off the edge into this planted swale. And it can move through this gravel zone and ultimately into drains. So here's a case where we're not taking water from the street and we're not overflowing along the curb line. We're actually going into a pipe system. So we're trying to get as much water out of the flow before it gets to the pipe as possible. So if you go to the next slide, here is a section through that permeable pavement. And so we've got the pavers with open joints that allow the water to move down through, and it's a layer of sand and 2 different sizes of gravel that the water can move down through. And there's a perforated pipe. In this case, this is the overflow. So if the system starts to get really full, meaning there's a lot of water in the gravel zone, at a certain point, it'll start to flow into that pipe and connect out to the sewer system. Next slide. Here's the swale. And this one's not connected to the pipe network, though it can. If you go to the next slide, this one, wait, sorry, go back to the previous one. There's a note. It can be hard to read these things. There's a note in this one on the left side that there's a polyethylene corrugated pipe where indicated. So sometimes there's a pipe in here. And so, you know, there's a lot of calculation that goes into these systems to understand where we anticipate water and where we need to move it to. So even though you don't see a pipe in this drawing, sometimes there is a pipe that connects it back to the system as needed. Excuse me. Okay, you can bump ahead 2 slides. And here is the dog run at Theodore Roosevelt Park. I am not as familiar with this project, and I wonder, Margaret, if this is a moment for you to jump in and talk to the sections, or we can look together.
Well, we thought it would be a good idea to look at Bullmoose Dog Run, seeing as this was sort of the catalyst for our conversation this evening. And this actually has, I mean, you all know better, I think, than Matt and I do, that this has long-term drainage problems, this particular site and this particular dog run. So they actually sort of designed a fairly complex drainage system for, you know, subsurface drainage. As you know, we've got dog runs in Riverside Park, and typically we've sort of installed perforated drainage pipes basically under the stone screenings in the dog runs. And basically a perforated pipe, you know, the idea is it's there when you get an immense volume of water, and, you know, then it sort of channels the water to the existing drainage structure. But, you know, our dog runs, we tend to have stone screenings, and that gets fairly compacted. In this case, I think, you know, their aim was to make a kind of more permeable surface. And they designed a system which is actually quite like typically what we do in synthetic turf ball fields, in that they designed a system of flat sort of drains, the idea that those drains were then going to pick up the water, and they were going to then take the water. I think they're approximately 12 feet apart. So throughout the, you know, underneath the surface here, there are, you know, these flat panel drains that then sort of connect to the rain garden system that you see along the right-hand side of this image here. And there, it's effectively, you know, partially it's a sort of dry well. And, you know, when we refer to a dry well, that's a sort of pretty large kind of catchment area that can be a large area of broken stone. And the idea is that, you know, beneath the planting and beneath the permeable, you know, beneath the topsoil system, that area is going to hold, you know, quite a lot of water there. And then in this system, you know, there's like a third layer where, you know, if that itself overflows, then there is actually a traditional drainage pipe, which then connects into the, you know, into the existing drainage structure that predates the, you know, the construction of the dog run. So let's have a look at the detail, Mark, if you could go to the next. So in this one, you can see, you know, you can see that, you know, that sort of pretty deep area, the geotextile holds the broken stone in place. There is the broken stone, and then there is one of these kind of flat panel drains that lie underneath the surface. And then on the right-hand side there is the sort of typical polyethylene drainage pipe that would then tie into the existing drainage infrastructure. Do you have anything to add, Matt?
No, that's great. Thank you.
And for the last two, we haven't done a lot of, we've got a lot of drainage problems in Riverside Park, as you know, and we have a large design project pending. I think some of you know we've got a lot of city funding to do an analysis of the drainage system in a sort of pretty large area of the park north of 99th Street. So we're looking forward to kind of moving ahead with that and to learning a lot, you know, and implementing all sorts of different systems, you know, whether it's permeable pavement, whether it's rain gardens, bioswales, whether we use plant material to address the drainage problems. You know, it's going to be a challenge, and we're looking forward to, you know, to learning and implementing over the next few years. But the next two are some super, super simple areas in the park where we have basically installed what we have been calling rain gardens. And, I say rain garden here. These are areas that don't tie into any existing drainage infrastructure, that are basically just a swale, a low area in the landscape that has sort of layers of, topsoil, maybe sort of more of a kind of sandy loam, some kind of more absorbent sort of soil condition. And then below that, this kind of dry well condition, possibly of broken stone. So this one is up at a bridge that was built by State DOT, actually. It's up at 153rd Street, and it goes over the Henry Hudson Parkway and, connects Riverside Drive with the waterfront park there. And on the left-hand side there, because there was limited drainage available in this particular area, and we had this existing pavement, then the designers sort of basically created this kind of low planted area that would pick up the water that was sheeting down from this asphalt pavement. And the last one, the next one, Mark, is a similar area. This is up in Fort Washington Park. It's up at an area where we put some new areas of active recreation, and absolutely no existing drainage infrastructure there at all. So basically all of the water that is sheeting off these areas of asphalt where these basketball courts and handball areas are, is all running into these various plantings that run all the way around the perimeter. And again, this doesn't even have the broken stone layer. This basically just has the plant material. It has the topsoil, and it has the more sandy loam topsoil, 2 12-inch lifts of topsoil and a kind of indentation, a swale in the planting area, and appears to be pretty successfully picking up the water from these areas.
Okay.
So that's it with the slides. Let's all try to stay just on audio and not video in order to maximize the technology and ability to keep with Matt. So why don't we start with committee members? Ken has changed his photo there. Committee members with any questions for Matt or for Margaret about this, and then we'll turn to community members. I believe that, as I said, the committee members are not muted now. So, but how are we going to do this? I guess people can just jump in with questions, and if you're falling all over each other, we'll come up with something more formal. Anybody want to start with a question for Matt or Margaret?
I had a couple.
Sure, Ken.
Okay. Thank you. That's really a very impressive project and very welcome and very much needed. I'm wondering what the timeline is for taking care of all the current priority CSO areas, and how far along we are on that timeline, if you know.
Well, so, the target is 2030. And as I have been hearing it recently, the financial challenges related to COVID have slowed things down considerably. So, but the regulators are not accepting that as an excuse. And so there's a kind of dialogue underway about how DEP is going to keep on track. And as I mentioned, they're the source of funds for many of these projects. And so the urgency to meet the storm, the water quality goals seems to be working in our favor relative to prioritizing these efforts going forward. But it's a shifting landscape every day, so it's a little hard to report with any accuracy on how quickly things are going to move forward.
Okay, and is there any kind of new construction mandate? That is, when a new street is repaved or a new street is built, or any other kind of construction that they have to include bioswales?
So I can't really speak to streets, but I can speak to parks. And yes, and they're getting more stringent, but it has been, Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of rule of thumb has been if you do not increase the area, the paved area, the impervious area, then there isn't a requirement to mitigate the flow. But if you, if you're going to create a new paved area or widen a path or in any way increase the amount of impervious surface, then you have to mitigate and limit additional flow into the system. And there's a version of that applies to private landowners, and there's a version that I'm sure has come up in your work, Margaret. Have you had experience with this?
I have not, because
okay.
it isn't. It doesn't come up a lot in Riverside Park, in a sort of an existing park where we're typically not increasing the amount of pavement.
Yeah. There's also a kind of best practice that you can really see when parks are renovated around the city. You can see that there's an effort on the part of capital designers to direct water into planted areas before, at a minimum, to direct water where possible, into planted areas before putting it directly into drains, and to kind of, add rain gardens where possible. And so, often it's some combination of solving a flooding drainage challenge, but not always. It's recognized within the professional landscape architecture community that this is the right thing to do, and so these features get integrated for that reason quite a bit.
And I think for anybody who has visited Phase 5 of Riverside Park South that has just opened in the last couple of weeks, you can really see that in practice, because there are a lot of smaller areas of plantings. And there is, like the Randall's Island example, there is existing drainage infrastructure in there, in that you can see a catch basin, but it is, instead of being in an area of pavement, it's actually in the landscape, and the goal there being that the landscape will be picking up, as Matt says, the bulk of the water, and then the excess will then go into the system.
Thanks. Ken, is that it for your questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, who else on the committee or non-committee board members has questions for Matt or Margaret?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, Barbara.
I had asked for this clarification tonight because I was confused as to why you put the bioswale or the rain garden in the location in Theodore Roosevelt Park where you did. Now, Margaret, you said that there was a flooding problem there, but I'm on the board for Friends of Roosevelt Park. It was our understanding that the only time that there was any sort of flooding problem was when the irrigation system broke. But that said, I had thought, now we built a bioswale on Columbus Avenue, and I was under the impression that a bioswale does really clean anything that comes into it in a way that a rain garden doesn't, because of the various levels of substrata that it has. Now, please correct me if I'm mistaken. We built our bioswale in 2013, and we built it because we had a flooding problem, and it did solve that problem. And it has been going strong and fantastically well ever since then. So I just, I'm still confused now, because you say that the terms are used interchangeably. And my understanding was that our bioswale, because I watched it being built, and it was very deep, maybe 8 feet deep. I'm not sure exactly anymore, but how deep is a rain garden? Does it have that depth, and does it have all those levels of rocks and pebbles and sand and stuff?
Again, I would think of it more as a continuum, and it's very site specific. But I think perhaps another sort of informal use of the two terms is that a rain garden is simpler than a bioswale. But again, they're also used interchangeably. So the DEP program that's building these units all over the city, they just switched their language from bioswale to rain garden. It's the exact same thing, but they just are calling it a different name. And so, yeah, so I'm not surprised to hear that the system that you built along the road is very deep, because there's very compressed space and there's a lot of water, right? You've got this big wide street and not a lot of relatively not a lot of space. Where we have less water or more space or both, they tend to be shallower by virtue of cost. We always want to build the most cost efficient thing. And so like I was out today in Queens looking at a site where we're going to build, we're only going to go down 3 feet total. That's partly because of space and partly because of what we learned when we tested. When we dug down to see what was going on, we understood that where the groundwater was, and we couldn't go very deep. And so there's a whole host of factors that go into deciding depth and the layers of material that really depends more on site than it does on this kind of the term that's being used to describe it.
So Barbara, who was for many years the head of the Columbus Avenue bid, and in that capacity did the bioswale, has provided a few slides for us tonight, and Mark has them to sort of illustrate. I mean, and that is in our district, very central in our district. It might be a good moment, just Barbara, to just show those slides for a moment or two to get a little more context here. Sure. Can you get them, Mark?
Okay,
Barbara,
so
if you want to describe them.
So my area on Columbus Avenue is from 67th to 82nd Street. This is a schoolyard fence. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It goes from 76th on the southern corner to 77th on the northern corner. And this is how it looked in 2012. Okay, Mark, next one, please. So this is, we started to build out to make something, we put in a complete sustainable streetscape here. And this was the start of it. This is not the bioswale. Bioswale's on the street side, not the schoolyard side. You'll see that in a moment. So this is the bioswale before it got planted. I had thought that I had some photos of looking really deep into the well, but I was not able to find them today. And you can see that it has I'm pointing and like anybody can see it. Really, that's ridiculous. You can see where the curb cut is, goes into the stone near the curb side, near where that car is parked, allowing the water to flow in there. And on this corner of 76th Street, there was a terrible flooding problem, which immediately got solved once this area got planted. Okay, next, please. So this is the start of plants that were put in for us. And we did have, the next slide is a ribbon cutting. And I put this one in here because it's such a trip down memory lane. I'm the one in that stupid striped dress. And in back of me is the Deputy Commissioner of DEP at the time. That was Magdi Farag, his name was. And he was so shocked when I called him and said that we wanted to build a bioswale. He said, nobody's ever asked for a bioswale. But he insisted on coming to the ribbon cutting. So that was very sweet. Back of him is Wendy Foyer, who's the head of design for DOT. And Nick Pettinati, I think most of you know him because I think he's presented to the Parks Committee fairly recently on the right. And then in the back there is Mark Diller, who was there all those years ago, and Mel Wymore, who was chair of the board at the time, in the front row, and a lot of our restaurateurs. Okay, so before we knew it, our street had become one that you just raced down because it was so desolate and ugly. We had identified it as by far the ugliest street in the Columbus Avenue bid, to one that was so populated that you couldn't find a place to sit. And that is still the case today. And now, because it was adjacent to a school and also opposite the Museum of Natural History, I absolutely wanted to put in a plaque to describe how a bioswale worked. And that is still there today. I had it engraved. The museum was originally going to write it for us, but then the bioswale person quit. So I had to research it, and I wrote it. But it is there, and it's good. And this is the streetscape today. It has really grown up in these years since 2013. And it is, it's great. It's just a great addition to the neighborhood. So that's the end.
Thanks, Barbara. Who else had, first of all, committee and board members, who else has questions for Margaret or Matt? And then we'll turn to community members as well.
We have 10 questions in the Q&A, and I think they're all from Ira.
All from Ira. Ira, we will call on you shortly, but we're not going to do 10 questions. So figure out which ones you most want to ask. Meanwhile, in the chat, we've got, oh, that's also from Ira. So Susan likes the striped dress. Okay. Anybody else? I have a question to the Susan Schwartz first.
Oh,
yeah, Susan Schwartz.
I just want to say it's a great presentation, and bravo, Barbara. And I disagree about your comments about the striped dress. The dress is fine.
Thank you.
Hi,
I had a question,
sure.
Clara. Yeah. I was wondering if there's any specific way to measure the success of these bioswales, or is it just that before the bioswale was put in, there was flooding and then there wasn't any afterwards? Like, is it measured in the number of inches of water that's somehow collected? Like, what is the measurement of success?
So I'll jump in with this sort of general answer, which is, it depends on what your goal is, and that's site specific. So if you're trying to address a flooding issue and you solve it, that's a pretty straightforward thing. If you're specifically trying to keep water out of the sewer system, it's the amount of water you keep out of it, but there's a kind of upper limit. You have to do it in a cost efficient way. So, there's only so much water an area of ground can take. And so we're always trying to optimize for a space where we can cost effectively, space efficiently capture a large quantity of water. And that can be, that takes a fair amount of desktop analysis and site analysis. And that is all based on calculation, right? You test the soil, you do the math, you look at how much water you do a site survey to figure out how much water is headed in the direction of the piece of infrastructure you're building. But then it's only in the few sites where we actually monitor. I showed you that one site in Brighton Beach. We only have a handful around the city, more than a handful, but a very, very small percentage of the total where we're actually testing to see, because it's very, very time intensive to actually test to see how well it's working. We have one site up in the Bronx where we're monitoring by, we're actually tracking how much water is coming into, we have a perfectly symmetrical street with catch basins going into the sewer system on either side. And we have a rain garden on one side of the street. And so we can actually see exactly how much water would be going into the catch basin by looking at the one on the other side of the street. So we've got a piece of monitoring equipment that in every storm, it's telling us exactly how much water is being diverted by the stormwater green street. So that's a piece of research that that Professor Drexel is very excited about, because it's kind of foolproof. You can absolutely know that the stormwater green street is doing a specific amount of work. So that was a lot in answer to your question.
Thank you.
It's complicated.
Okay, I think what I'd like to do is to turn to members of the community, because I want to just do another 10, 15 minutes on this and then get to the rest of our agenda. Ira, if you want to go first, I have to figure out how to unmute you, but you can't do 10 questions. Oh, by the way, welcome to our friend Krista Carmody of the Parks Department, who's joined us tonight. Welcome, Krista. How do we unmute Ira?
He's
Ira,
unmuted.
choose your top
I think
three
I'm
questions.
unmuted.
Oh, you're unmuted? Okay.
Yeah.
I think Mark did it. Okay, top 3 questions, Ira.
Oh, 3. I was going to go
Or
with
2,
2.
or whatever.
First, can all the slides be made available to the public by putting them online? And that's really a question for the CB7.
Yeah, I'll work on that. I'm not.
Thank you.
I assume so, but.
Okay.
I mean, it's good. It's great hearing about the program in general. I didn't know that Parks was working in conjunction with DEP.
Hey, Mark, is it okay with you if I just forward the set of slides to Ira?
Sure, but I think Ira's point is a good one, that we might as well share it with everybody, not just Ira.
Okay. Next question.
Okay. While DEP won't do GI in Manhattan because of less bang for the buck, it's a different story for parks because DPR has parks in Manhattan. And that's really a comment. Where in Brighton Beach is the rain garden, and what is the name of the Drexel professor doing the study? I swim there often in the summer, so I would visit.
Okay.
Give the professor's name, but he probably wants to do a study first, I assume, and publish a paper.
Yeah, I don't have the professor's name offhand, but I can follow up with that one.
Is your email, Matthew? Is it matthew.donham@parks.nyc.gov?
It's matthew.donham@parks.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I'm trying to find the cross street for you. It's Brighton 11th or Brighton
11th. Okay, that's good to know.
And Ocean View Avenue.
Okay, there is a DEP GI infrastructure map. Would this be on the map, or is it on your own different map?
So this one, there are a few that aren't funded by DEP, and this is one of them. So it will not be on their map.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, it's right in front of a school there that I can't. My math isn't putting.
Okay, you can do email back and forth if you need to follow up. Then, guys. One more, Ira, and I see Daniel has got his hand up. Okay.
That's it.
Let's go to Daniel Asa. Now let's see. Can I unmute him? Can I?
You should be able to.
Allow to talk. Daniel Asa, you're on mute, I think.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Matt, for the great presentation. Really important work, and wish you luck reaching your goals by 2030.
Thank you.
I represent the Upper West Side Neighborhood Naturalist Group, and I have 3 questions, so I'll go through them quickly. Do you use soil from the Clean Soil Bank?
We are working on this currently. It's challenging for us within our contract process. I'm still learning about this and learning about where the challenges lie, but it's more costly. Our contractors want to charge us more to use soil bank soil. And so we're trying to find a way around this.
Yeah, well, I hope you succeed because, New York City is mostly glacial till, which is gravel, sand, and super well draining soil. So it's kind of a shame that we might have to bring soil from somewhere else, like sandy loam or sand and gravel from far away, when it's, you know, available. So I think it's worth the extra money. I would pay extra for it. Next question is, do you have a percentage of native plants that must be used in your new projects? I know that, you know, what's happened in the past is the past, but present and going forward, is there a quota for native plants?
So I can't speak for the agency as a whole, but within the work of my team, and we're 100% native plants.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. They
Much
couldn't
of
ask
it,
for better than that. That is terrific.
Much of it grown at the Greenbelt Native Plant Center out on Staten Island. I don't know if you're familiar.
Even better. That's such really terrific news. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I think that's.
Hey, Daniel, question number 3. You had a third question?
Yeah, would a green infrastructure project be contemplated or built in a natural area within a park? So let's say you had a really low swampy area in, you know, in Van Cortlandt Park or any park somewhere in Staten Island. It was in the middle of kind of a natural area surrounded by lots of trees, but it was a low swampy area. Would that kind of low area ever be designated? Well, let's send all the stormwater into that area and we'll go in there and we'll dig it out and we'll build these basins in a natural area within a park. Would that happen?
Well, those areas are most often those areas are mapped as wetlands. And so our goal is actually to protect them from the stormwater. So we just completed a stretch of the Putnam Greenway up in Van Cortlandt Park. And so we were taking what had been a muddy path through a very wet woodland with some mapped wetlands within it. And we were paving that path with asphalt, and we incorporated a trench full of gravel. Call it a rain garden or a bioswale or something else entirely. But essentially what we were trying to do is take the water that was coming off of that path and get it into the ground before it would flow over the surface and have an impact on the low swampy wetland area. Because we don't want to supercharge, you know, we don't want to modify the hydrology where it's naturally occurring. We want to try to mitigate, we want to limit the impact of the, you know, the built structure. And so we're doing just the opposite. Yeah.
And another strategy that we've taken with that sort of situation is not necessarily to excavate and to do, you know, to have a lot of disturbance. We have an area down at 83rd Street in Riverside Park that has been persistently very, very wet. And, you know, either there's a lot of clay soil underneath there, or I suspect it's probably on bedrock. And we had a lot of problems with standing water there. So we've actually just kind of decided, okay, this area just naturally wants to be wet. Let's sort of go with the flow. So now we have probably about 15 bald cypress in there. They look absolutely fabulous. They're thriving. They're really, really large trees now. And we have a lot of native, you know, appropriate native perennials under, you know, planted underneath them. So, you know, it really wasn't necessary to, you know, to do any kind of excavation or anything really significant. It was just basically down to making a feature of it and finding the appropriate plant material to kind of address the situation.
Thanks, Margaret.
Sounds great. I'll go and visit that. Thank you.
So I don't see any other hands up from attendees.
Clary, we have one question from Jill Benzer.
Okay.
And then maybe I think it's time to move our agenda.
I do see Jill's hand, so we're going to allow Jill Benzer to talk. I just clicked on something. Now I have to go unmute her, I think.
Okay.
Did that do it? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a marvelous presentation. I just want to say, have you been using certain plants in general more than others that are good for the water and among the native plants? And considering that most of the plants are receiving water from asphalt in the city, and there are some negative elements of asphalt, but I don't know if there have been any studies to determine how much of those negative elements might be going into the plants, and are the plants able to do well in spite of it, and so forth. That's my basic question. Okay.
Okay. So again, it really depends on the site condition. And well, there are a number of factors. But if water from the roadway is coming into the green infrastructure, there are plants that can tolerate that, you know, the metals and the kind of intensity of roadway runoff. There's a broader range of plants that can just appreciate being wet and having wet feet. And so, you know, that's a major shift between species. And then I would say it then depends on the context. So there are places where we want to make something that feels like a perennial garden. And so we'll choose, you know, perennials and grasses that can meet the other conditions. And then there are other places where it's really quite more of a natural area, and there's a kind of larger ecosystem to connect with, where we wouldn't want to be planting ornamental plants, but we would want to be planting plants that were part of that larger landscape. So generally, we look to have the piece of green infrastructure fit into its context. So, you know, there's quite a range for that reason. And there is a very small list of plants that are repeatedly planted in the right-of-way rain gardens built by DEP. You know, there are about 10 plants that they're planting very regularly. And that's a published list that you can look at. You know, coneflower does quite well in that condition. There are just a few street trees that can handle having their feet wet, and I'm not thinking of any of them offhand. But so, you know, that's the most challenging condition, where you've got a small planter in the sidewalk that's receiving a lot of water from the street. And so those are the most bulletproof plants that get planted repeatedly.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have just one question that kind of relates back to Jill's question a little bit. Often when we review projects in Central Park and Riverside Park, sometimes in other parks that they're really reconstructions or renovations. They're not, as Margaret said, we really don't have creating new, it's very rare to have a new or even a widened path. But we often say, hey, you're doing that in asphalt. Is there something you can use that's more permeable? And I'm speaking very generally. This is Clary speaking. So I'm not talking about any particular project, although maybe the Crabapple Grove in Riverside Park might have been an example. And we tend to get the answer of asphalt is the only one we can afford, basically. And I'm not sure that's a fair characterization. But is that basically what's going on when we, in general, are redoing a landscape and not widening a path? We kind of have to stick with asphalt. I mean, I guess maybe Margaret is the better person on that one.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're going to be doing this big drainage study of predominantly of the area of the park north of around about 110th Street, where, you know, we have immense drainage problems. And I'm really interested to see what that analysis comes up with, because I think we really, really want to look at more permeable pavement and less pavement. But the technologies I think that we've seen so far have not really been very suitable for heavily used park paths where you have, packers and maintenance vehicles driving on them. So, I mean, I think we're interested in exploring, more of other materials, and as you know, we've used stone screenings for paths, areas where we have, pedestrian walkways, just paths, vehicular usage. We have used other materials. But, from what I've seen so far of, permeable asphalt and more permeable pavement types, it isn't really particularly practical, what we've seen so far for our, park path infrastructure.
Thanks, Margaret. I see that Peter Arnson has put in basically the same question that Ira asked. He's put into the chat, will the presentation be available for viewing later? Peter, Mark had said, Mark Diller, that we'll see what we can do about that. Although happy to, Peter, if I don't think I have your email address, if you put it in the chat, or just whatever, I'm happy to just forward the presentation to you, as I said I would do for Ira, while Mark is working on a broader, whether we can have it more broadly available. So I think we're done with this item, unless
I noticed that Matt Genrich has his hand up.
He does? Oh, absolutely. Let's get
I just
Matt.
had one quick comment. Thank you, Matt and Margaret, for putting this presentation together. But it dawned on me that Bloomingdale Playground at 104th and Amsterdam had, when it was constructed, they put some green infrastructure in there. So, and I believe that even takes some street runoff from a tree pit. There's some gardens all around the perimeter of the park that take in, water when it rains. So there's another site on the Upper West Side that has some green infrastructure that's been recently built.
Thanks, Matt.
So I think we can go back to having our cameras on now. I think it was a good idea for the bandwidth for Matt's presentation, but it sounds like we're ready for Margaret's presentation. So let's see if that'll work in the usual method. And are we ready for that, Clara? Shall I call up the slides?
Yeah, we are ready for that, and we're going to have slides from Margaret. Now, this one, Margaret, you may be asking for resolution tonight. Is that the case?
The LPC is advisory, so I would certainly welcome it, but it's not, I think, totally essential.
Okay.
Right, so this is a reconstruction of an existing bluestone stair at 107th Street in Riverside Park. This, like a couple of the projects that I showed you earlier in the year, is actually funded by the Riverside Park Conservancy. So this is not, typically we get our funding from local elected officials. I mean, we now have, the Conservancy are now raising some money. They have some very interested donors, and they're raising some money to address, some of our infrastructure problems in the park. So it's great because these are projects that we can do in a fraction of the time that we could with a typical parks capital project. So next slide, Mark. This is an existing bluestone stair. It's actually kind of like in the mid-level of the park. There's not an entry stair. There's an entry stair at Riverside Drive at 108th Street. And as you progress down into the park, this is kind of like, this stair makes a connection with the path that runs along the park wall. And
is that this slide, the goals?
On the right-hand side, the goals. Yeah. So on the right.
That's the stair back there?
Yeah, this is the stair where you see those little orange cones. That's the stair tucked into those trees there. And on the right-hand side there is the volunteer house. So our goals here, thanks. Our goals with the project are to, the stair, as you can see from the cones and the temporary barricades, is actually closed at the moment. It's probably been closed for about a year now, which is problematic because it's a really essential connection close enough to the park entrance. But the existing bluestone risers have started to settle, so it's basically in a hazardous condition. So we were forced to close it, unfortunately. So the proposal is to remove, there are 3 landings, there are sets of bluestone risers, and then there are 3 landings. And the 3 landings are existing asphalt pavement, which is in poor condition. The existing bluestone risers have kind of heaved and settled. So there are some of them are even moving, they're wobbling around. So our proposal is to, we're moving ahead with the assumption that the existing concrete foundation is in poor condition. I should say this is, Moses era stair. Some of the bluestone might have been sort of cannibalized from earlier Olmsted era stairs. It looks pretty old, but this actual stair was built in the 1930s. So it has an existing concrete cheek wall. It has low handrails either side, and it has, bluestone with asphalt on the landings. So our proposal is to assume that we're going to need a completely new reinforced concrete foundation. We're planning to use new thermal bluestone risers. So all of the risers will match the existing dimensions, but they will all be new. And instead of putting the asphalt back on the landings, what we have found, this stair is typical of many others in the park because the park was built, the bulk of what we see in the park was built over the period of 2 or 3 years from 1934 to 1937. There's basically, very similar details park-wide. So I pretty much know, looking at these stairs, basically how they were built. And this and the materials that were used, this one is a little unusual in that it doesn't have bluestone on the landings, but other stairs in the park that are very similar to this do. So we're planning to make it a little bit nicer and install natural cleft bluestone pavers at the landing instead of replacing the asphalt. We'll put a new ADA compliant handrail down the center of it because the handrails on either side are too low, so they're not compliant. And, we assume that although the existing asphalt pavement top and bottom is in poor condition, after you've had large machinery driving around on it for 4 months, obviously it's going to be in poor condition. So we'll replace the asphalt pavement top and bottom. So next slide, please. So just to reiterate the location, we're in Riverside Park in the park interior at 107th Street. Next one, these are our boilerplate slides. It's well out of the flood zone. And it is in the next one. It is in the residential to the east of Riverside Park, parkland to the west. The next one should have the existing conditions. Oh, no, here we are with our location. So 108th Street, this is the entry stair. This is our stair with the box around it. And you can see, the location adjacent to the volunteer house and making this really essential connection to the interior park paths, to the south to the dog run, and to the west to the promenade. So it's very problematic having it closed because, the alternative routes take you significantly north and south of the stair. Next slide. So this is the close-up of our condition. You can see that the bluestone risers are settling, they're moving, they're wobbling around. It's in very poor condition and closed because of the hazardous condition. Next, Mark. So what we're proposing to do, this is actually the detail of the stair. We completed a similar bluestone stair at 87th Street in the parks on the south end of Soldiers and Sailors Plaza in 2009. So we're proposing to reuse the same details. In this image on the right, it's a little bit hard to see because of the size of the photograph, but we put new bluestone on those much, much larger landings in this stair. Oh, actually, you can see it sort of on the bottom of the image there. The bluestone pavers with completely new, with new thermal risers and a new reinforced foundation. In this particular case, the fence on the right-hand side was taller, so we were able to attach a handrail to this fence. With the staircase at 107th Street, the existing fence that's in the cheek walls is lower, so it's very, very hard to make that. It's impossible, basically, to make that compliant. So next one, Mark. Again, the details that we're using, the bottom of the stair at 87th Street on the right-hand side with the new bluestone. and a typical detail of the bluestone pavers. On the right-hand side, this is a step ramp that we completed fairly recently and shows the handrail detail that we're proposing to use. The right-hand side, the right-hand bottom, you can see where we stole this nice detail that we're now going to use throughout the park. This is actually a bluestone stair leading down into the Arsenal Central Park handrail, and we liked it because, as you can see from the step ramp, it's very minimal. You know, it's a sort of pretty, you know, we have to add it, but it's pretty subtle and it's transparent, and it doesn't really take too much away from the kind of, you know, the transparency and the sort of aesthetic of the stair. And there might be one more. And this is the one that I came to in one of the two projects I think we talked about earlier in the year that was also privately funded. So just to kind of look at the beauty of doing these projects with the Conservancy, I think maybe I was at CB7 maybe in March or April or something with this project. It went into construction over the summer and was completed just a few weeks later. So you can see, you know, the big improvement that we made to the sidewalk in this area, and how, you know, quickly we were able to do it thanks to the private funding. So, and that's it.
So let's take questions for Margaret. Margaret, the project sounds great. I don't have any questions about the physical project, but I'm a little confused, and I think we could all get a little educated on the approval process. You don't need a resolution for us tonight. So, I mean, let me try a couple of questions to put together. First of all, what was it about this one that the Riverside Park Conservancy is funding? Was it that they just had somebody with money that this is a pet project for, so they happen to get money for this? Because I know we've got several sets of stairs and step ramps on our budget priority list, our capital budget priorities. This one wasn't even on our list. It's wonderful that there's funding. Is that just how it happened, that there was some big donor that was interested and had the money?
This is not a donor with a specific agenda to, you know, a particular area of the park, which typically people want to put money into the playground they use, or in this particular instance, you know, it was just a donor that was interested in doing work that was essential, you know, something that we felt was a priority. And, you know, I'm a little surprised that this was not on our latest capital list, because to be perfectly honest, this and the stair at 83rd Street are probably the highest on our capital list. And this one was top of the list because it's, as I said, it's heavily used and it's closed. So this was one that we proposed as, you know, to the donor as something that we were really, you know, that we would like to address.
Because when I spoke to Steve Simon when we were doing our budget priorities, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or something, he listed a number of sets of stairs, and we share the concern about them. This just wasn't on that list. Maybe because you already had the funding. Maybe that's why he didn't talk about it.
That's because we already had the funding.
Yeah. So next, go ahead.
We do in capital, we do capital needs requests. So we identify projects that really need to be addressed, and we do an estimate for it. And we had certainly done an estimate for this project, and it was high on our list of essential reconstructions.
So the next question, and I think you made some mention of this, is even though you're doing it because the money comes from the Conservancy, does that mean you can avoid the whole capital, the 283 step or whatever it is, capital spending process in the Parks Department, and just get it done in a radically more efficient way?
Yes, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that it goes through the same approvals process. I mean, we go to Parks Department for approval, we come to you, it will go to Landmarks Preservation Commission, as have other projects that have been privately funded. But, you know, we don't, and we have contractors that have done similar work on the park. So we get bids from those contractors, and, you know, there are contractors we know. You know, so utilizing the lowest bidder in that particular instance is not a bad way to go, because the 3 contractors that we ask for bids are all contractors that we like and are competent. So yes, I mean, it just expedites the process.
Okay, so third question on process is why is it that, what makes this one different from the ones that you typically ask for a resolution on, or are resolutions always not essential?
We always ask for a resolution, but I have been told by landmarks, when I submit the projects, that the resolutions aren't always necessary because they function in an advisory capacity with landscape projects. But I, it's good to have a resolution, and it's good, but I mean, I have been told it's not essential. But
I think we're happy not to tie up our very lengthy board meetings with resolutions if we don't need to. But it's not because this is private. This is funded by the Conservancy, rather.
No, it has no relationship to any funding source.
Other questions for Margaret? Committee members, and then we'll go to Ken. I see your hands up. Ken, is your hand up for this?
Yes.
Okay.
Margaret, first of all, I saw the price tag is $750,000. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to note that Howard Yaris, our co-chair of our transportation committee, recently told me that DOT said their average cost for a curb extension is $700,000. So this seems much more sophisticated and complicated. So I think we're getting a lot more for our money, or somebody's money. Let's see, what was my other question?
That's partly because Margaret is very good at what she does, Ken.
Yes, I think that's true too. She should be doing our curb extensions.
That's right.
It would look better too.
When would construction begin, and how long would it take?
So in this instance, because of the time of year, we would probably go into construction in March, and I would anticipate about 4 months. So, we'll be done with this by next summer. And this is good because, that allows me to sort of work on the approvals over the winter, and then we're just good to go as soon as the weather gets, as soon as, things warm up a little bit in March. And then in the interim, the contractor orders the bluestone and the pavers and everything. Those are long lead items. So, as soon as the weather's good, we're good to go.
Great. That was it.
Okay. Other committee members, you don't have to put up your hands. We're a little more informal, but Susan?
Will this go before landmarks? I'm sorry, before preservation?
Typically, these projects in Riverside Park don't go to our preservation committee. They come to us, Susan, here in this committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If there's something really major like the rotunda, we had some joint stuff, but not something like this. Anybody else on the committee or board members? Doug is shaking his head no.
Hey, Clary.
Yeah.
Clary, I actually don't have a question about this specific issue, but I do have a Riverside Park question. Should I wait till after we're done with?
Wait, because
okay.
We're doing a lot of Riverside updates that I got from John Harold. We can do it then. I'm looking through the.
Peter Arnson joined. I put him into panel so he could ask his question.
Oh, okay, Peter.
Sorry, I just had a comment on the last speaker, and that was regarding the. I put it into the chat. It was basically that this committee had created one of the first rainwater capture spaces, was involved in it by adding the 110th Street Green Street into its district needs statement back 15 to 20 years ago. And that was created in conjunction with the people up at the cathedral. And it's never quite worked as we would like, but I'll look forward to hearing more about the ones that do work. So thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So any other questions from anybody? I'm looking at the community members. I don't see any hands up there. Do we want to do resolution? Mark, what do you recommend, Mark? Do you want to have us do a resolution for the full board?
We typically do, and I don't think our full board agenda is so tight that we can't spare a couple of minutes for Margaret's project.
All right, well, I'm willing to propose a resolution that would approve the plans for this project. As always, we would have a couple of whereas clauses praising Margaret's work or something like that. A good thing here, I think, is that we are going to get a somewhat more, am I right, Margaret, a somewhat more permeable set of landings, because instead of being asphalt, they're going to be, what's the word, a cleft bluestone, is that the word? I mean, it all sounds good.
It will not be permeable though, Clary,
Oh,
because
okay.
it's a concrete slab. The water will.
Oh, right. The slab underneath is what isn't. Yeah. Still an elegant project, much needed. And I mean, I wish we could cross it off of our capital priority list, but it never got on our capital priority list, so we don't have to do that. All right, let's just take, if anybody else has no more comments, let's take a quick vote of the members of the committee, and we're all here. I think Elizabeth joined us, and I think she's still here. Maybe she's not still here.
I think she left.
Okay, let's take a vote of the committee members who are in favor. We might as well just do this by voice, by what do you call it? Asking each person. Susan, yes. Susan? Ken?
Yes.
Yes.
Doug? Doug, you're mute.
Yes.
Yes. Natasha?
Yes.
Me, that's 5. Elizabeth isn't here. Barbara Adler? Is Barbara here?
We may have lost her.
Okay, wait. So we have 5. We don't have Barbara. We don't have Elizabeth. Are we missing some? Did I miss somebody? Susan, Ken, Natasha, Doug, and me. Is that it?
And yeah, right.
Yeah, okay,
you have a quorum. You have a quorum. You're fine.
Yeah, okay. And non-committee board members, we've got Doug Kleiman, Rich Robbins, Mark Diller. Let's hear from each of you.
Yes.
Yes. Mark?
Yes.
And Rich?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 5 to, well, I didn't do the rest of the vote, but it's 5 to 0 to 0 to 0 and 3 to 0 to 0 to 0.
Oh, hang on a second. Barbara Adler is now in, let me see what happened here. Barbara Adler is now in attendees, so I'm promoting her back. She must have had to leave. Hi, Barbara.
And she's mute.
I did not leave.
Okay.
I just disappeared off the screen and I couldn't get myself back, but I'm absolutely a yes for this project.
All right, so in Barbara, you're voting with the committee. I think you are on the committee now.
Yep,
so
is.
It's fine with us anyway.
6.
So you're going to be 6 to 0 to 0 to 0, 3 to 0 to 0 to 0. And thank you very much, Margaret, as always. So the last thing we're going to do, and Margaret, please, if you're, she must be here still somewhere, and other members of the public, please stay with us too. I had asked Margaret yesterday in an email yesterday, Sunday, sorry about that, if she could give us updates on a lot of the current projects on detours and other projects in Riverside Park, and got instead a long telephone call with John Harold today, who's the administrator of Riverside Park, who gave me a lot of information and asked that rather than troubling Margaret for her knowledge on these things, that we use the information we got from John. So I'm going to just tell you what I learned today. There's some good stuff on some of the detours that are going to be ending. We're not going to trouble Margaret for details on this unless there's something that she can helpfully add and wants to add. So let me do these. And Barbara, in terms of the notes, don't particularly worry for the minutes because I've got the notes here. Okay, we've had a lot of, there's a construction detour between on the, this is all in Riverside Park. There's a construction detour between 59th and 61st, which has taken the pedestrians and put them in on the cycling path. It's cut it in half and it's been very crowded. It's had a lot of problems. And this is because riprap, or not riprap, because the part of the park at the river had caved in. And with some FEMA money is being repaired. So good news, today, those barriers went away. They're still being stored at the side. John sent me a photo very late today. So that detour is finished. And the pedestrians are going to be back on the pedestrian path, and the bike path is going to assume its normal width, and those barriers are going to be gone. So that's a good one. Next one, there's been a construction detour at between 71st and 76th along the Esplanade, which has taken cyclists off the Rosenthal bypass for those 4 blocks and put them on the Esplanade along with the pedestrians. Most of the problems there were with bad signage, which we managed to get much better. But anyway, the upshot of it is that that detour, John says, is likely to be finished by about the end of this week. So those cyclists will then be going back fully on the Rosenthal bypass at this time. The big staircase, the big pedestrian staircase will be unblocked, and that will become available again. So getting rid of that detour is a really good thing. The context of this is the project, this is part of the project we call the Brewer Money Project, where some money came out of a ULURP almost a decade ago. The project itself, which is making a lot of improvements at the northern end of Riverside Park South, is going to be going on for about 1.5 years. So this detour just related to one small part of the project where they were doing some work at the 72nd Street corner of Riverside South. But it's going to be great that the detour is finished. And John said it's quite a cooperative contractor, and during the course of the next 1.5 years, while other areas of the park, of that part of the park, may be closed down for some time, it's not all going to be at once. It's going to try to minimize inconvenience to park users. And when it's all finished, after about 1.5 years, we'll have a number of really great improvements at that northern end of the park. Okay, next one was the Cherry Walk, which, as some of you know, has some signage problems, but has been closed for a few, just maybe 3 weeks, because we have a FEMA money project going on to restore some of the riprap, which is the big stones between the path and the river. That's riprap is the name of that stuff. So even though that's just a few blocks, because the Cherry Walk has no outlet between where it starts at 100 First or something and where it ends up there near what used to be Fairway, the whole Cherry Walk has been diverted to a detour. But good news, John says that detour is likely to end, and none of this is for sure, but probably early December. So that won't be so bad. The next question I asked John was something that very interesting to cyclists and pedestrians who use Riverside Park, that's been troubling a lot of us since Phase 5, which Margaret mentioned earlier, opened, which is there's that great, wide, fantastic pathway that is for cyclists. It's if you go into the Phase 5 at 68th Street, or you can go in wherever you go, but at 68th Street, there's this wonderful wide path that leads down, it leads east, it leads south, and then down to the river. That has bicycle markings on it in the pavement, and has always been billed as a cycling path down to the river, to the Greenway. But those of us who have observed it in the last 2 or 3 weeks since that part of the park opened have seen a lot more pedestrians on that path, including little kids, than cyclists. And so I asked John today whether it is intended that that pathway be just cyclists, and if so, how they could possibly enforce that. There are no signs saying just cyclists, and even if there were, you would never keep pedestrians off because it's just too attractive. Anyway, what John said is this: that pathway is not ADA compliant. There are no ADA requirements for cycling paths, so it doesn't have to be compliant, ADA compliant to be a cycling path. So it's not a designated pedestrian path, but he said they are planning to probably to put up some signs saying it's a shared pathway. And we can expect going forward that it will be shared. It's quite wide, as these things go, by pedestrians and cyclists. But what's very important about it is it's going to be a way for cyclists who are coming westbound and then want to go to the Greenway. They can enter Riverside South Park at 68th Street and immediately get onto this wonderful path, ramp, and get to the Greenway, and then either go north or south. So that was the answer on that. My next question to John was about the Rotunda project. I think everybody on the committee now was with us when we reviewed over many months in several meetings that project, which is being done by the DOT Bridges Department in conjunction with the Parks Department. And we hadn't heard anything about it for a really long time, and we've still been unable to find out anything about it from DOT. But what John told me is that, first of all, he believes that they're in the award stage, and we can take this with some grain of salt because John is not directly involved, but believes they're in the award stage to a contractor, which sounds like they bid it and chose a contractor. And then it goes through many stages of the controller's office and office of OMB, et cetera. So that was, but that construction is likely to start no sooner than the early spring. When that happens, there's going to be not necessarily all at once, but a certain amount of closing of our park space is going to become unavailable. John told me, and you may remember this from when we were talking to the presenters on this project, that the Parks Department has been very insistent that an entrance to the park at 79th Street remain open during the construction. Cyclists approaching at 79th Street may have to dismount, but John said the Parks Department has been quite insistent that there will be access for pedestrians and cyclists in some way from 79th Street. So we still have a lot to learn about when and how that's going to happen, but it has moved that far anyway. The other thing, phase 6, which is the last phase of Riverside Park South, which is being done by the developer, and that's got a terribly long and tortured history. John's information on that is secondhand, but I believe what he said is that they do not have a contract yet, but are close to that. Those of us who were on the committee and when we did the review of that project, we remember we had that phase has a big multi-sport field that also has many other uses that it can be put to. We had a lot of community comment in favor of lighting for that field. And good news, John said, is the lighting has remained in that, and we had to do some advocacy for that. That the lighting is included in the plan, John said. However, the really bad news, which we learned several weeks ago when we were doing our budget update, our budget priorities, is that unbeknownst to us, they've dropped from the project what was an absolutely essential piece of it from the beginning, from 30 years ago in the restrictive declaration that lays out what is supposed to be in the park, which is the comfort station that was combined with a little park maintenance facility. And similarly in phase 5, the wonderful phase that just was opened was supposed to be a comfort station that was designed but never bid. So you've got 2 fabulous phases of the park, but if you have to go to the bathroom, you got a problem. Which is why we put on our budget priorities both of these comfort stations. It should not be up to CB7 to find millions of dollars to build comfort stations that were always part of the plans of these 2 phases of the park, but our having put them in our budget priorities, we hope will assist the Parks Department in somehow finding the money to build these comfort stations. So that was it, I think. One other thing I learned from John today, and this is still very fuzzy and impressionistic. We've been concerned about bicycle accidents on the Rosenthal bypass since it opened in about Memorial Day of 2019. And we know there's incomplete reporting on them. It's kind of anecdotal and chance that these get reported. What John did say is that based on the reports he gets, which is quite by chance, because he said that there are times when EMS might be there and he doesn't get a report. There are times when the police might be there and he doesn't get a report. But he said of the reports he has gotten of whether it's single bicycle accident, bicycle pedestrian, two bicycles, or whatever combination, he has not seen an increase in accidents on the Rosenthal bypass compared to before it was put into effect. I think that's all fairly soft information because of the somewhat chance nature of which accidents get reported to the Riverside Park Administration or not. But for what it's worth, John said that based on the incident reports that he's gotten, there's not an increase in accidents.
You mean compared to the waterfront path?
Compared to, I think what he's talking about, Ken, and this was really a kind of not central to the discussion I had today with John. I think he's talking about in the whole geographic area, the southern end of the park versus before, but I'm not really sure. So.
Did he say there's a decrease?
No, he said there's no increase, or that in the reports he gets, which again are very, chance and episodic and not by any means every accident, that he hasn't seen an increase, and that's all he said. And I did not ask him to define the geographic area, so I'm not totally sure the answer to Ken's question.
And there's no knowledge of whether severity of any crashes is greater or lesser.
I didn't ask that specifically, Rich, but I think that's probably true. I don't know. I think what happens is if somebody at if a Parks Department employee is aware of an accident and file, they do have a process, whether it's an accident or a million other things that get reported. There's some kind of a tick of a little incident note. So if there's been an accident which is not for some reason relayed to the Riverside Park Administration by a Parks Department employee, and my understanding is that it doesn't get recorded. So for instance, EMS could be there, but EMS doesn't then report to the Parks Department, there was an accident and here's what happened. The police department might be there, but they apparently don't have a method of telling the Parks Department uniformly, here's what happened. So it's very, very chance, it sounds like to me. But that's, we'll have to learn more about it later. It really wasn't central to what I was talking to John about. Mostly I was concerned about getting the updates on these detours and on the Rotunda project. So.
Laura, you had a question from Natasha, and
okay, yeah, Natasha, where is she?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question. This is related to one of the updates that you just gave about the Rotunda project.
Yeah.
So we think that it'll start in March. We're not sure, but that's what we've been told.
Well, John said early spring, and I take that with a grain of salt because he's not running.
Sure, of course. But I have to say that right now, if you have to enter the park as a pedestrian, not as a cyclist, if you have to enter the park from 79th Street, you have to go through, go down those stairs, go through the Rotunda area, which is, there's no concessionaire there anymore. The area is extremely deserted, extremely desolate. It's crumbling. It's very dirty. There's no reason for anybody to be there except to actually get to the waterfront. And so I often see like at least one person sort of hanging out over there. I don't know what they're doing. I go there a lot, and I go there principally because of my kids. So I have young kids with me. It's an area that really needs some attention. Right now, I realize there's this big, huge capital project coming at some point, but in the absence of that, or until that gets there, is there no way that we can put on some sort of a Band-Aid to get better lighting? It gets very dark, very early nowadays. You know, by 4:30, it is already very dark. And if you want to, if you're around 79th Street and as a pedestrian, you want to get to the waterfront, then you either have to go all the way to 72nd or all the way to 83rd or 84th. And, you know, but like if you're around 79, then you really have to really risk it by going down those very sketchy, very dark stairs. Everything's crumbling, very, very dirty, you know, all sorts of shady characters sort of around over there. And I was just wondering if we have people from Riverside Park right now, what can be done?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether Margaret can speak to that at all. Margaret, are you with us still?
Yeah, I'm still here. I am going to pass this on to John and Ben and Jeff to see what they can do, because you know, I walk in and out of there myself, and I know what you mean. And I think part of the problem is, you know, the rotunda used to be our maintenance facility. So you had the concessionaire, you know, there when the weather was good, you know, throughout the summer and into the evening and everything. And even in the winter, when the concessionaire wasn't there, you know, we had people working at night. There was more of a kind of presence there than there is now. So I actually walked through there myself earlier today, and it was during the day, you know, and there was graffiti there, and there was kind of homeless debris there. So I don't necessarily have an answer, but I will pass this on to Ben and John and Jeff and see what they can do.
Margaret, was the garage, which my understanding was that residents of the, I mean, people who have boats who live on liveaboards were using the garage or could use the garage.
As far as I'm aware,
that closed now too?
No, it's empty. I mean, there are chain link gates at both of the entrances, and it is basically a shell now.
Yeah.
So
they sort of started getting prepared for the project and closed things off, and then.
Well, you know, initially we thought it was going to start last summer. You know, we're hoping it's going to start this spring or this summer. You know, but we have to get through the winter. So I think your concerns are very valid, and I'll, you know, we'll talk about this and see if there's anything that can be done to address it, or, you know, just be visiting it and clearing it more regularly as a start.
Yeah, it's very abandoned right now, and I feel like it's just a matter of time before some incident happens over there that could very easily have been prevented. Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Natasha. Mark, you mentioned somebody else had a hand up or wanted to.
I see Ken. No, there's Natasha that I was calling on.
Right.
Ken's got his hand up.
Okay. And, Margaret, do you happen to have any more information about the scheduling or staging of the actual rotunda construction than what I got from John?
No, John and I talked about this earlier, and I asked Katie, you know, as you know, Katie Riley is the project manager, and she's the person who's most often in contact with DOT, and she does not have any recent updates, but as we get them, we'll pass them on to you.
Okay, great. I also see from Doug Kleiman, our colleague here in the chat, that we shouldn't say accident, we should say crash is the preferred vernacular when people have a crash. So do we have anything else tonight?
Shall I go?
You still got Ken.
Ken.
Yeah, just on the rotunda, when the construction begins, and cyclists are booted off the Rosenthal bypass, are there any plans to, it's going to be a shock to walkers on the Esplanade who've had it to themselves now for a couple of years. And are there any plans, and this may be just a question for John as a follow-up, but to help pedestrians and cyclists better coexist through signage or any other kind of infrastructure?
I would say that would be a question for John and Jeff and Ben. I think it's a good point. I think we've got used to, a different kind of dynamic there, and things will have to be done to alert people to the change, and it's going to be a long-term change.
Let me add two things about that. One is I forgot to say at the beginning of the meeting that Jeff Martin, who's the day-to-day administrator of the park and normally joins our meetings, is apparently sick today, so he wasn't able to join us tonight. But I did discuss that with John a little bit today, Ken, and what John said is that he doesn't anticipate that the entire Rosenthal bypass will necessarily become unavailable to cyclists, that certainly the area around 79th Street, right around the rotunda, and getting up and over the rotunda would be unavailable, but that I guess he must mean the more southerly part of the bypass could still remain in effect. I'm not sure how the diversion would go, so that instead of being a shared path all the way down to 72nd, the more southerly part would still be separated. I can't quite picture how that would be. But anyway, John's point was to try to have, to the extent consistent with the construction project, minimal change and disruption from the current situation, which itself is hardly ideal, but has kept cyclists off of the Esplanade.
Well, we had a 2-year, I think we were going to review it in 2 years, so next May.
This is a little off topic, but hey,
Okay.
here we are, guys. I asked John about that today. I said, hey, John, do you think we're going to get to the Memorial Day of 2021, which would be everybody remembers that that's the 2-year time. And I reminded him that our CB7 resolution, and Margaret remembers that, I'm sure, the very long night we spent together talking about the plans for the bypass and how CB7 eventually voted in favor on a very split kind of a vote, with the proviso that there be a evaluation after 2 years. And what John said to me, he said, it's really a Parks Department thing, and you've asked for an evaluation after 2 years, and all I can say, Ken, is we asked for it. That was the basis of our approval, and we will push for it.
I thought it was that we were going to review it.
We will certainly can review it, but where that will go, we have no guarantee, but we intend to review it. We certainly intend to review it. Anything else tonight? Okay, great.
Are there any community comments on other
No,
topics?
I haven't seen any hands up from the community.
Okay. Okay, well then I guess we're all set.
Yeah, I guess we are.
Laurie, could you just tell me the non-committee board vote on the one resolution we had?
Yes, the resolution 3-0 to 0 to 0. It's 5,000 of committee members and 3,000 of.
Okay, thank you. It's when I disappeared, I was frazzled. I didn't hear. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know that Matt Dunham is still with us. I think he may not be, but Margaret, I'm not even sure Margaret's still with us. But both of them, thank you to them, and thanks to our community members who are with us tonight. And our colleague Cindy, our former colleague Cindy Cardinal, was here, although masquerading as Julian Della Porta. So still there, masquerading as Julian. So thank you very much, Cindy, for joining us tonight as well. And everybody who's been with us tonight. We currently have no agenda items that we know of for December. If we have agenda items, we'll meet. If we don't, we might take a little vacation. But we usually do end up with something, even if it's relatively last minute. So we'll see what comes up. That's
Peter
it.
has his hand up.
What?
Peter Arnson.
Oh, Peter.
Hi, just wanted to remind you that tomorrow Ethel Sheffer will be speaking.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Tomorrow's Tuesday.
Yeah.
Got it. Wednesday, Ethel will be speaking about Riverside South. And one of the things that happened because of that was that the sewage treatment plant was tested by Trump and determined that it did not need to be expanded. So I don't know if she's going to speak to that, but the sewage treatment plant that's in Riverside Park, up around 145th Street.
Well, it's its own park. It's a state park, Peter.
Well, it's both. It's in Riverside Park, and then the park on top of it is Riverbank State Park. So that's both correct.
Anyway, Ethel will be speaking, and it should be interesting. So.
Yeah, I don't know what the sewage treatment plant has to do with, I mean, I thought her talk was on the history of Riverside South, but maybe.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but that part of the determination was that the increase in population required a new sewage treatment plant.
Right.
And he came up with engineers that said that that was not true. And ever since then, if we have more than an inch of rain, raw sewage is put into the Hudson River.
Right.
So,
right.
Anyway,
Yes.
That's
exactly.
It's a side point, but it was appropriate for your committee, I thought.
Absolutely. So, thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
All right. So I don't remember what day the third Monday in December is, but we're sticking with the 6:30. If we have an agenda then, and we probably will, we'll all reconvene then. So thank you, everybody. I guess we can say
Very good.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.